This is the Graceful Atheist podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. I want to thank my latest reviewers on the Apple Podcast Store. Thank you to EEC Free and MM05. Appreciate you reviewing the podcast. You too can rate and review the podcast on the Apple Podcast Store. You can rate the podcast on Spotify and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. If you are in the middle of questioning, doubting, deconstructing, or even deconversion, you don't have to do that alone. Join us in our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. Today we are celebrating the 4-year anniversary of the podcast. Officially March 14th, 2019, we started the podcast. And every year I like to do a bit of a state of the podcast address. Every year we try to innovate in one way or another. This year we began by joining the Atheist United Studios podcast network, which has given us really good exposure outside of, say, my social media reach. We have continued to do the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group, which Arlene is the community manager of. Arlene continues to do Tuesday evening hangouts that review the previous week's episode, and that is thriving and doing really well. As of this morning, there are about 722 members in the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook group, which is amazing. We only started that about a year and a half ago, and it's been incredible to watch as people join and participate. We've started to do more social media outreach. Thank you to Ray for creating all the beautiful memes that are quotes from the guests that you see on both Facebook and Instagram. We're hoping to expand to TikTok at some point. All of these things help the podcast grow and reach a broader audience. In about a week and a half, we are going to cross the 250,000 download barrier. As I've said before, downloads are not a particularly good metric, but it's one that is at least consistent. And we have definitely been growing, and we have a consistent audience somewhere in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 people every week. This year, we also started up Patreon. Because of joining the Atheist United Studios podcast network, we have ads. For people who want an ad-free experience, they can become a patron at any level. But I want to thank all of those people who have jumped in immediately. I want to thank Joseph, John, Ruby, Sharon, Joel, Lars, Raymond, Rob, Peter, Tracy, Jimmy, Jason, and Nathan. Thank you all for being patrons. It makes a huge difference. With that Patreon money, this year we have started to do transcripts. Now the show notes have a full transcript that is AI generated. And we hope to continue innovating in one way or another. If you have any interest in participating in the podcast, whether that is the community, the podcast itself, social media, everything from web design to graphic artwork to audio work, anything that you are interested in doing, we would love to have you be a part of this community and participate. Reach out to me at gracefulatheists@gmail.com. My guests today are the people who have participated throughout the years, who have been my support, who have made the podcast possible. Arlene, who is our community manager, copy editor, co-host, and outreach coordinator. Mike T, who does the editing, again, something that I just would not have the time to do in both cases. Jimmy and Colin have been people I've been able to talk through ideas and what's working and what's not working and really help on the mental health support side of things. And Daniel is a new friend who brings the social sciences and psychology background and some actual hard science to the table. And we've been able to talk through several things. Look forward to having a future conversation with Daniel to share with you as well. Today we are talking about our favorite movies, books, YouTube, podcasts, what have you, anything that inspires us that has to do with either the topic of deconversion or secular grace. Now, of course, most of these things aren't overtly about these things, but under the hood, they very much are, and you're about to find that out. One word of warning. Spoiler alert, we spoil a number of movies, books, stories. Each of us takes a moment as we introduce the new topic. If you are interested in going and seeing that or reading that, then you need to stop there because it will be spoiled. In the show notes, there's a list of everything that we're going to talk about. You might want to go take a look at the show notes first before listening to the episode. Otherwise, celebrate with us 4 years of the podcast. Thank you, the audience, so much for being with us. Here are Arlene, Mike, Jimmy, Colin, and Daniel. I have with me the brain trust of the Graceful Atheist podcast. Arlene, Jimmy, Mike T, Daniel, and Colin are with me. We are celebrating the 4-year anniversary of the podcast. It started in 2019 in March, and we're here to celebrate. And ostensibly, we will be talking about our favorite movies, television programs, podcasts, YouTube's videos that have inspired us in the topic of secular grace or deconversion. I want to start with just a quick hello from everyone, and I'm going to start with Arlene.
Hi, I am Arlene. I am the community manager for the Facebook group, and I get to work with David and all these wonderful people. And yeah, if you're interested in being in the Facebook group, please DM me. All my information will be in the show notes.
And co-host and
Oh yes, I do get the interview.
And guest liaison and blog copyright editor, all the things. Arlene does all the things. And I'll go with Colin next.
Yes, my name is Colin. I was on the podcast a couple of years ago. Thanks to Jimmy, connected me to David. It was an incredible experience to get to share my story, since I weren't a lot of people in my life who asked me about it. And so I was honored to share and to stay involved and to listen to other people's stories. And something I talk to David a lot about is movies and how they are these parallels and ways of getting at our experience. So I'm quite excited to be here today and honored to be part of the anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah, and Colin is a master storyteller, so that is a lot of what he does.
I made that title up, of course.
Yeah,
unverifiable.
Yeah. Let's go with Mike T.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Mike T, or Mike, and I'm always behind the scenes editing all the episodes, and I get to hear, I guess, firsthand everybody's story, and it's kind of a privilege to really dig into these stories and just be able to just enjoy what people have been through, and I enjoy it myself. So that's awesome. That's what I do.
Yeah, and then obviously the podcast would not happen without Mike T. There's just no way. The amount of time that you spend in the editing booth, so to speak, very incredibly valuable to the podcast. Thank you, Mike. Let's go with Daniel.
Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel. I was on the podcast just this past year in the episode entitled "The Office of the Skeptic." Found the podcast last year. I think the exact Google search I did was "humanist podcasts that aren't angry," and found this one. Which
that is the sweet spot.
Yeah, it's just got to thread that needle, and spent almost about 10 years deconstructing, and then deconverted at the beginning of the pandemic. Officially, I guess, acknowledge the inner reality that had been there for a while. And this podcast was really great throughout that process of leaving the anger and the hurt behind.
Yes. And then Daniel, you do a lot of writing, and your background is it psychology or social science? I always get it wrong.
It's psychology. I have a bachelor's in social science and a master's in psychology.
So it's all the things. There we go.
So all of those very specific things.
That's right.
Very specific kind of science. I can't help you rewire your house. If you want to know why people are messed up, I'm your guy. Yeah.
But Daniel is the erudite voice amongst the group, the educated one. So, and last but definitely not least, Jimmy is Jimmy just let us know who you are.
Yeah, Jimmy. I was on the podcast in 2020, pretty shortly after I had left the church. So you may not have heard the episode unless you have gone back through the entire back catalog, but that's no problem. I have started writing blog posts for the blog and am mostly a lurker on the Facebook group, but yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, and Jimmy has been kind of a sounding board for me, along with Colin as well, over really a couple of years now. So a lot of me working through some of the things that we do on the podcast have been helped along because of Jimmy and Colin. And now Jimmy is writing blog posts and comes a lot from the perspective of the Stoics. So again, very a deep reader, I think, Jimmy, you are, and you're bringing a lot of philosophy to those blog posts. All right, guys. So
what a crew.
Yeah, we made it through the introductions. So what we want to talk about today are media of any kind, but specifically movies and television programs that have some element of deconversion or secular grace that have inspired us. And we're going to do what I call a snake draft. So we're going to go through the list. We're going to go through the same list we just did. And I'll be last, and then we will reverse that order if we still have time, and we'll keep going for as much time as we have. So we're going to lead off with Arlene.
Ooh, all right. Okay. So when you told me about this idea for talking about movies, I was like, that's awesome. This will be so fun. I love all these guys. I don't watch a lot of movies. Oh gosh, now I have no idea what I'm going to say. But I was able to come up, my favorite that I think movie-wise, that is secular grace, not deconversion, but secular grace is possibly a lot of superhero movies, but Endgame. Now I'm going to assume people have already seen it if they haven't.
I'm gonna, spoiler alert, at the beginning of the show, the intro, I'm gonna say spoiler alert for everything that we mentioned, because for sure I'm gonna ruin some things. So go for it.
So yes, Marvel movie. I don't know if y'all just heard that. My husband just like threw things. I have no idea what just happened. Endgame, the Marvel movie. It's the Avengers, and basically like half of humanity, half of the universe has been snapped away by the bad guy, and the Avengers realize, especially Tony Stark, they have to change this, even if it's going to change and alter their own lives. It's going to take away things from Tony Stark's lives. He's had a little girl, he's gotten married, like all these wonderful things, but they can't, in good conscience, not fix everything if they can figure out how to fix it. And so the whole movie is them figuring out how to fix it and being willing to sacrifice some to the death for the universe, for half of the population of the universe, to be able to bring them back. And they didn't have to do that. And I was like, this is secular grace to me. This is selflessness without being like sappy, because I have a hard time with sappy characters who just seem, I say, too unrealistic. These are superheroes, so it is unrealistic. But yeah, that was the first movie that came into my mind was Endgame.
That's great. I say all the time that, you know, it's unclear to me whether the story of sacrificing yourself for the people that you love is just Western prior to Christianity or because of Christianity, but there are a ton of movies where the person, the hero, gives themselves up for the sacrifice of others. And this is just deep, especially in Western societies, deep in our culture, and inescapable. Like, it's everywhere. And superheroes are a classic example of that. So, anyone else want to respond to Endgame?
This might be a deep cut. I was going to give snaps to Arlene, but I thought in this context, that's an evil.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Snap is a
that's right.
Bad thing.
Yeah, bad taste,
poor choice.
Yes.
Too soon.
Daniel?
I think it's a great pick, Arlene. I've always wanted to be, in the theater for a moment like Darth Vader telling Luke he was his father. you know?
Yes.
And because I remember my father telling me about that moment in the theater, and how people were like jumping out of their seats and like, my God, like everyone was having this huge reaction. So I got to go opening weekend with some friends to Endgame, and there were just so many moments, like, you know, Steve picking up the hammer, and the arrival of everybody through the portals, and like all
Yes.
these things, and then Tony's final snap. There were all these things that just were just like that moment, and you had people like jumping up in their seats in the theater, and going nuts. And I was just very, very grateful to be a part of that kind of moment. So I'm really glad that somebody brought it up.
Oh, yes. We are Marvel people, and I am a crier when it comes to movies. Like I will just weep and sob, and we were in the movie theater for Infinity War, and I just bawled the whole time. It was so sad. And then at the end, this woman just turned to me, and she was like, "It's okay. Black Panther had one movie. They're coming back. They're totally coming back. They have to come back." And I was like, "Okay, good point. Good point." And so yes, and being in there in Endgame, because yes, we were in the theater for opening weekend, and it was just, oh, it just gives me chills. It's such a, and we've seen it multiple times, and I still cry, and it's still fabulous. Oh, I just love it so much.
That's awesome.
We're pretty bad at watching Marvel movies in my family. I think we started Endgame before watching whatever movie came before it, because
Infinity
we
War.
didn't know what order they were in.
Oh,
From our
no.
perspective, it's
Oh,
just,
no.
there's a big pile of movies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's pick one. We
Yes,
stopped pretty quickly.
yeah, we've been watching them since Iron Man, the first one, and it's kind of ridiculous, maybe.
Yeah, if you have Disney Plus, you've got to watch them like in chronological order. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Although to be fair to Jimmy, it's sort of like recommending The Wire now, because it's like 100 hours of entertainment.
Oh,
You know?
that's
There's,
true.
Yeah,
there's that element of like, I really should, but whew.
yeah.
And I love that idea that you just jumped in and you're like, okay, so who is everyone?
It's almost like in the middle of a scene. Not quite,
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
almost in the middle of a scene. So yeah, we kind of
Yeah.
realized that we had no clue. So
Yeah.
we did it right.
Yeah.
That was better.
All right, I'm going to tap Colin for your first choice.
I mean, basically the same example as Avengers Endgame, Lars and the Real Girl from 2007.
They're really
I mean,
comparable. Exactly.
basically same budget. So I don't know if people know this, and I do want to echo David. I have to spoil it to talk about it. So you can like jump ahead. So if you want, but what I'll say is Ryan Gosling, before he was hot, was weird, was great, did really interesting indie movies. I mean, I've been a fan of him way before he got jacked and did Crazy Stupid Love and The Notebook, you know, right?
Notebook.
But
Yeah.
Lars and the Real Girl is a story about a man and his wife and the man's brother, who's living in the garage, who is very disturbed in some way. He's a hermit. He is he can't make eye contact. He can't be touched by people. This is Lars, and he one day he buys a real doll, which is a sex doll. It's like a $2,000 anatomically correct size and weight woman, and it is I mean, everybody is just like, what do we say? Like he treats her like a real person. He brings her on dates. He asks his sister-in-law for clothes for her because she lost her luggage on the trip. I mean, it's a complete, break from reality. So they take him to a psychologist who says he is working something out and he's in a very fragile place, and you need to go along with him until he reaches the end of whatever this is. And they're like, people are going to make fun of us. And she says, yes, they are. And it's the first instance of people acting on Lars' behalf, even to their own cost. And what ends up happening is, first off, he creates a lot of confidence by doing these, by simulating life. He takes her to a party. He they go on dates, they go they go bowling. I mean, it's really strange, but it's very funny in that I think it's played mostly straight. He starts making eye contact. He starts to talk to a woman at work who he has a crush on, a real girl,
Human.
not real capital girl, a woman. And what I would say is secular grace to a T is that essentially this whole town of people go along with him, and they take Bianca out, and Bianca's the name of the doll. She starts volunteering, and they cut her hair, and they support him as he eventually reaches a complete tragedy of she's died. And it's him emerging from this episode, and along the way discovering that all the people in this town love him and will do whatever he needs. And I talk about chills, Arlene. I get chills thinking about it. And it's there's no mention of, there's a little bit of a mention of religion, but it's a pretty clear example of someone in our community needs us.
Yeah.
And I highly, even though I sort of spoil it, it's really fun to watch. And to watch people kind of at first, especially like, why are we she's not,
Yeah.
and but playing along, and it's a great one.
I love this movie, and Colin, thank you for being brave enough to bring it up. It really is, the premise sounds so odd and strange, and yet you absolutely love Lars, you absolutely love Bianca, and you love the community by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it is about the community loving someone and caring for them where they are at, right? Not asking this Lars character to do be normal, right? They're not asking him to do that. They're letting him go through what he's going through, and ultimately leads to healing in his life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really something to watch.
Seems like we talk about community a whole lot, and it seems like one of the things that people often fail to recognize about community is that everybody is different.
Yeah.
To sort of adapt Tolstoy, everybody's dysfunctional in their own special way.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to summarize him. Yeah.
Well, it's the intro to Anna Karenina. So pretty short. But,
one of the famous first lines.
Right, exactly. But it's one of those reality checks that once you kind of come to terms with it, it's fine. It's good. You accept it. You move on. Everybody sort of starts adapting to the reality of the situation, and like the community adapted to Lars, his sort of oddball situation. It is beautiful. Yeah,
That's
And
awesome.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the movie. I wrote it down so we can see it. But I'm sure the community, like he brought his own uniqueness to the community, and that added value to their lives that they probably wouldn't have expected. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
He's a wonderful person. I mean, there's a really funny moment at a party when the women have sort of sat with him and this with Bianca, and he's sort of whispering to her. I mean, they're clearly in love, and at some point he gets up and they go like, I'd love to find a man like that, And so even though we've departed reality, you start to see Lars' good qualities. And I think it's heroic. I think it's heroic in a less flashy way. I have a friend who struggles with mental health stuff and is up and is down, and we've been friends for years. And I am deeply invested in the outcome of him reaching the person he wants to be, and he is in me. And so I'm like, that's also the model. If you're not Tony Stark, you can still do heroic things.
Awesome. Mike T, you're up, man.
Oh boy. So far I haven't seen either of these movies that we talked about, but now I know I have to go back and watch them. So I think the first thing that kind of came to my mind, it wasn't a movie, it was a series, and it was Vikings. And I think it's on Netflix. You can see it all. And it's it's violent, but there's good storylines with the characters. And I guess just the overview is the main character Ragnar Lothbrok. He he finds a way that he can travel to the east. You know, they're known for their looting and plundering, so they want to go to new lands. So he finds this. I think it's basically uh, a way to map the, the by the stars and everything, and how to make sure they're traveling east to these new lands they hear about. So they get to England area, and they come across. I think the first place they come across is where a bunch of monks are staying, and they end up kidnapping one of the monks, and they're Christians. So you have the Christian gods, and then you have all the Norse gods, Odin and everything. So they kidnap this one monk, take him back, and he ends up kind of assimilating into their community. And him and Ragnar become almost like best friends, mutual respect for each other, and it's really interesting how they interact. And by the, I guess not to make it spoiler, but I guess it's hard not to say stuff.
Yeah.
It's deep into the series. They almost come to a place where we talk about these gods and things, and there's really no evidence for your gods or my gods. We're just in this
Mm,
thing of
yeah.
life trying to survive. And what's the use of all this fighting over your gods being, submissive to my gods? And they kind of take in how their people are reacting to all this. And of course, there's lots of tragedies and things throughout the story. And eventually, Ragnar, he meets his death, and he has a son that takes over kind of where he's from, and he does terrible things. But it all comes back together in the end that what he learned from his dad and stuff is true. That this is just about life and about learning to respect other people for who they are, and that we don't have to stick to these traditions that we've been told our whole lives.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that's kind of what came to my mind.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, like, having comparative religion in, say, school or something like that, it would be a really, really good thing, because once you start to see the similarities and the differences, it's harder to say, but my group has the absolute truth when you just
Yes,
start to share notes.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really great show, Mike, and I think the history that comes out of that whole time period with the Vikings and Ragnar, like his family settled a northern part of France, which became known as Normandy later, right? And Normandy became like the cultural center of Europe for a time, like being very, very highbrow and fancy. And then eventually the Norman invasion of England kind of brought all that culture to the United Kingdom. And it's so interesting to think how it all came from, like, essentially one guy who was just like, I'm gonna raid better than other people have raided before. I'm gonna be better at attacking people, and now we have like all the stuff that came out of Normandy. It's such a fascinating part of history.
It is. Yes. Yeah.
All right, Daniel.
Well, I'm kind of surprised nobody said it yet, but Star Trek, The Next Generation,
Yeah.
especially, but
Yeah.
all
Yes.
Star Trek for me has been a really big part of my life, and the deconversion is no different. Growing up, The Next Generation was very important to me. I had, I had a good childhood, but there were some parts that were really really hard and painful. One of them was, I had ADHD and was not diagnosed, and so I struggled with a lot of the things that came from that, like rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, and so on. And also there was a time where I was bullied quite badly for many years. And I know when you say you were bullied as a kid, people think like, okay, you got beat up behind the bleachers, they took your lunch money kind of thing. At its worst, I got put in the hospital with a broken arm, and
Wow.
things were quite um, quite uncomfortable. And I was always very thankful for my father, who, he took it seriously, and he, threatened legal action, and the school division finally took it seriously too. It was a different time. Nobody really paid that close attention. Boys will be boys, kind of BS. But there was a lot of Star Trek in my life. My parents loved watching it, and I loved watching it. And the incredible thing for me was that I believed the things that they told me about the world
Mm.
over my own experience.
Oh, wow.
'Cause I could have thought like, this is like the world is awful, you know, like, yeah, I've got a good family and all this stuff, but the world is awful. Like I'm being treated badly. And I know people who internalize that. And sure, there were some things I carried with me for a while, but when you had moments in The Next Generation where Captain Picard says, he quotes Hamlet, and he says, what Hamlet says with irony, or I say with conviction, what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty,
Hmm.
in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god. And he says that I can see us one day becoming like this as a species. And I believed that
Wow.
over my own experience. That set me on a path, was one of many different things that made me want to be a people helper when I got older. And after my long deconstruction, leaving ministry in 2010, and then arriving at the start of the pandemic and realizing I haven't believed in God in years. Like, what am I doing? And getting sent to work from home, at my job, I sat on my couch with my laptop, and I was mostly doing writing and editing documents and putting together PowerPoint presentations for people. And I put my television on, and what do you know? It The Next Generation is available on Netflix in Canada, and I rewatched the entire series
Hmm.
while
Wow.
I was working,
Yeah.
because I could do that. Except for the odd Zoom call, I was essentially by myself. And I was amazed how consistently the message of secular humanism, of
Yeah.
hope, of helping people, of what humanity could be,
Mhm.
was just woven throughout. And so then I started Deep Space Nine again, and I started Voyager again, and I watched through all of this stuff that was so integral to me growing up, and rediscovering it, at almost 40, and realizing this is containing messages um, that really cast a great hope for humanity. And there's a quote from Gene Roddenberry about the first Star Trek series, where he said that Star Trek was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins not just to tolerate, but take a special delight in differences in ideas and
Mm.
differences in life forms. And I just it helped bring me back. And I was, for a large part of the pandemic, and my early deconversion, I was very angry, and I was very bitter,
Mm.
and it really sunk into my soul. And among the many things that helped bring me out of it, like this podcast, and like my wife and her patience and love, and my family, Star Trek was another piece of that puzzle, and I'm very thankful for it.
That's so awesome.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about optimism lately, and how someone said that being a pessimist is like smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. It'll take 10 years off your life.
Mm.
And you look at the world around you, and if you pay too much attention to the way it's presented to us, then you end up in the land of pessimism. So optimistic sci-fi is definitely special,
Mm.
giving
Yeah.
a sort of a vision, casting a vision forward for this is what we could be, and this is what we are at our best. Because sci-fi is never about the future; it's about right now, typically. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's great, Daniel.
Yeah.
even the framing, Daniel, of the quote, the difference between the irony and sincerity. We're Gen X, and and we've taken irony to the next level, and then the generations following us have just exploded that, so that it's almost uncool to be sincere. And Star Trek is just heartbreakingly sincere, and I love that. First of all, I kind of my early 20s was Next Generation, and it was huge for me. And I realize now how much of my humanism is informed by the Next Generation, actually. And then just last thing is a plug. I'm right now working out to discuss with the podcast hosts of Humanist Trek, Sarah Ray and Ali, let me get her name right, Ali Ashmead, are the hosts, and they are going through the original series and pulling out all the humanism that Gene Roddenberry had within it. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation with them. So,
Ooh, that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I grew up on TNG, and then I grew up on the movies because my mom grew up on the original series, and she would do like Trek-oramas with her grandma. Like they would watch all night long the original series would come on. And so I grew up on TNG and the movies, and I think it was Lars that's in the group, not Lars on the movie, Lars in the conversion group, one day mentioned how his humanism, his worldview had been very much influenced by Next Generation. And I was like, oh, I haven't thought about it. So, Daniel, this makes me want to go back and, watch, because I haven't seen these shows and movies since I was, when we first got married, we went back through Next Generation and watched them. But since I've deconverted, I haven't even gone back and watched any of them. So this makes me want to do it.
Yeah. Me too. One last bit of irony is that I was watching TNG while going to Bible college. So,
Scandalous.
Yeah. Well, but also like, my whole thing was about grace and the, that the Christians around me didn't get it. So anyway, we'll drop that. Jimmy, you are up, sir.
So speaking of sci-fi, optimistic sci-fi, Arrival is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yes.
It's based on a short story called The Story of Your Life. And the short story is very different in style. It's sort of a very short story, if that makes any sense. But the movie, there's a lot of themes that really stand out to me for the movie, but one of them is that of acceptance. And of course, obligatory spoiler alert, the linchpin of the movie is that she can see past, present, and future because she's learning this special alien language. I'm going to pull out a couple quotes. If you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things? If you were omniscient about your life. And then that's sort of near the middle of the movie. And then at the end, despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it and I welcome every moment of it. And if you've watched the movie, you know that there's some hard stuff that's going on. It's, second watching, it's pretty clear what's being foreshadowed. It's pretty muddy the first time through, I think intentionally. But, whether we like it or not, the life we have is the life we have. It's the one that we are currently living. And the acceptance is such a major part of living it well. I'm kind of obsessed with not dwelling on the past. And it's just such a powerful, regret I find problematic, guilt I find problematic, all these dynamics to sort of have us looking back at the past and beating our present selves up about it. I almost hate it. I'm not willing to dismiss all of it. I'm not willing to throw it all away, but I just keep finding reasons to try to avoid regret altogether. Just let it go and look forward. And on a related note, Alan Watts he had a little spiel. You hear recordings of Alan Watts every so often, like in video games and stuff. It's the weirdest thing. He's really recordable, I guess. But he asked us to imagine dreaming a dream where we could live a 75-year life over and over again. And the first time through, you're like, it's the perfect life, totally comfortable. You love it. It's just total, all pleasure, no pain. And then at the end, you're like, let's change things up. Let's do it again. This time we'll throw a little uncertainty in there just to make things interesting. And then you sort of iterate on that over and over again. And eventually you land on your life right now, which I thought was a pretty powerful framing of just how uncertain life can be and just how rough it can be and how it's the life we have it can be, if that makes any sense. So yeah, Arrival, wonderful movie, and now completely spoiled.
I'm going to spoil it further. That was on my list.
Okay.
The one of the main ideas you've just suggested is, would you live the life knowing ahead of time? And one of the main storylines is a very rough relationship with the main character and her daughter. That's very difficult and then ultimately tragic. The daughter dies at the age of 25. And so she is still making the choices that lead to that her daughter existing and loving her and experiencing all of that pain and tragedy. And I just think that's just utterly beautiful that the humanism there of, love does involve pain. Love is difficult. Relationships are hard, and yet they are still worth it. Even if you know it's going to end, even if you know tragedy is looming, it's still worth it. And I think that's just a beautiful part of that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the rare movies that I could watch, I don't know, twice a year.
Yeah.
Very, very, very few movies like that I even watch twice at all.
Not spoiled, Jimmy. Everyone should watch it.
Yes. I agree.
Incredibly constructed and filmed, and the language, the way they represent the language is that's wonderful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm partial to linguistics myself to begin with, so the whole idea of xenolinguistics is a different topic.
And I'll say a plug for Ted Chiang's short story is amazing, and the book Stories, plural, of Your Life is an anthology of his short stories. It's just absolutely amazing. I've actually got a blog post about one called Hell is the Absence of God. Very relevant, really very, very relevant. So
yeah. And his second volume, Exhalation Stories, is also, he deals a lot with religious themes, spiritual themes, being two different sets of themes. Very definitely worth reading.
Fantastic. I'm going to reorder mine because everyone did Secular Grace. So I've got a deconversion one to talk about next round, but the one I want to talk about is semi-related to, and I was actually going to almost pair them with Arrival. So this was perfect, Jimmy. Thank you for planning it this way. Is Interstellar. Interstellar is a Christopher Nolan movie who I am just like, he's like crack cocaine for me. I also love Tenet and Inception and basically everything he's ever done. But the premise of Interstellar is the relativity and the way that time works. And so the main character, the father, is an astronaut. He goes out into deep space towards a black hole. Time and relativity take place, and so his daughter is aging back at home. But the heart of the story is that he is like almost communicating with her throughout this, and they keep touching base over time. And the analogy that I love in this is that love is fifth dimensional, right? Ultimately, he gets to directly communicate with her in real time. And again, spoilers. And then at the very end of the film, he meets her in her old age. He is still young, and he meets her in her old age. And it's just this incredibly touching and loving moment. But for me, the analogy of love as fifth dimensional also springs to mind why religious thought takes place, right? like I repeat to myself all the time, love is fifth dimensional, and it has this deep and profound meaning for me. But of course, I don't mean it literally, right?
Mhm.
And I can see how easy it would be for, if I were passing that story along to someone else, to begin to take it literally, and like, let's say 3 generations later, to begin to take that literally. So you can see that impulse to do that, and yet I still think that this is an amazing analogy, and that love transcends space and time, metaphorically, and connects us as human beings.
The love of your past parents to your past self has meaningful impact in the future, and being able to rely on just as a specific example, being able to rely on the love of someone else moving into the future. Yeah, I like it. It's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
And that theme too, that musical score, right? That
Oh,
Yeah.
signature to
yes.
Yes.
Interstellar. I was
Yeah.
in an airport in Charlotte last week, and the piano player was playing it.
Mm.
You go, ooh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That's
have
Give
to
it the
stop.
pretty.
chills. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So my son and I were watching the movie on our previous TV, which was a hand-me-down of a hand-me-down or something like that. And all Christopher Nolan movies just basically start clipping on the speakers. So it was very hard to hear.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were watching this movie, and it's the scene where he's leaving his family,
Mm-hmm.
which is, as a father of daughters,
Mm.
uh, is pretty rough on
Yeah.
me. And so I
Yeah.
was sitting there watching this. Then my wife and 2 daughters come back in the room. Oh, they come back from some event or something, and my daughter sits down next to us and starts watching with us. And then she left and said, "I hate this movie."
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're doing a snake draft. So it's back to Jimmy. So your number 2 choice.
All right. So authenticity. My movie for authenticity is Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, which was a surprising. I tend to go very I weight Rotten Tomatoes fairly heavily in my whether I decide to watch a movie or not, and it was pretty high. And sometimes that just means it is what it is and doesn't pretend to be anything but more. And sometimes it means this is an amazing film. Well, this was a good story. It was just a really good story. Um, and it's hilarious because she's an English woman. She goes to France and she meets some people who are heavily into existentialist philosophy, like just rattling off to each other all these technical terms and stuff. And it occurred to me while watching this, she is like the ultimate existentialist. When Mrs. Harris, she is a widow, she is middle-aged, she's working class. She decides one day she's going to buy uh, a couture, handmade couture gown from whatever the fancy brand was. It doesn't stick. It was it's a well-known brand. Anyway, you've all heard of it.
High fashion. Yeah.
But she's just this regular lady, and she just decides she's going to save up the money to go to Paris and order this gown, which makes sense. You go to a store and you buy some stuff. Well, she arrives. Yes, Christian Dior. That's right. So she arrives in Paris, and immediately she's just contact with people, all kinds of different people. She's showing kindness to everybody. She's just bringing people together, just making human connection, sort of overcoming all these boundaries. So the people, the staff at Christian Dior don't know what to make of her, but they're kind of like, this is kind of cool. They're sort of like, we have no idea what to do with this lady, but we like it. And then she brings the 2 existentialists together and blah blah blah, and whatever. Not to spoil absolutely every detail of the movie, but it's hilarious because one of the dynamics of existentialist philosophy is that of facticity. So we're born with different characteristics. You're a man, you're a woman, male, female, whatever. You're white, you're black, you're American, you're French, you're upper class, middle class, you're a nerd, you're a jock, whatever, all these things. And to live an authentic life is to sort of transcend that it involves transcending that. And she just was in the process of doing that just by living her life. She transcended the fact that she was middle class or working class by deciding to buy an upper class gown, even though she really didn't have anywhere to wear it. She transcended like all these different all expectations of her. One major theme throughout was just her age and how you sort of become invisible when you're the older you get. And so, but she didn't stand for it. She took various actions to sort of overcome that. So it was funny to me when it occurred to me, but it was also kind of delightful just because here's this middle-aged English lady, and she's like way more actually existentialist than these two French people talking about Sartre and Beauvoir and all these whatever at each other.
That's awesome.
So it was pretty cool. It was a good movie.
I like the message too of just, being comfortable with yourself, being comfortable with who you are, and not feeling out of place where maybe other people think you're out of place. Yes. It's like you're just comfortable with yourself and you accept yourself and you're able to move about the world.
And the point is, and I kind of went overboard on the existential side of things, but the point is that she was living an authentic life. Yeah. And that's exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I especially admire women who can do that, because it does not come naturally to me. And for years being like, I grew up in a home where boys were more favored than girls, and then become a Christian and they're like, that's true. And it's like, okay, so you just keep going and believing it. And then coming out of all that, it's like, oh, I can, be my whole self. I can, my husband uses the phrase, exert my presence. Especially for me, it's hardest at the gym. Nobody's ever said anything unkind or been rude, but I see these women who can just go in there and they just do it. And I'm like, I have to talk myself into it all the time to like just exist and not apologize all the time. So yeah, I want to see that. That movie sounds really good.
And if just to put a book plug in, How to Be Authentic is a good introduction, especially to sort of feminist existentialism, because it's a very accessible introduction.
Awesome.
Yes, books are my happy place.
Well, I just want to say, Arlene, thank you for sharing that. That's
absolutely.
That's kind of the heroic thing I was talking about earlier. Is overcoming a story, and in your case, not an internal story, a cultural programming that just like, that's really, really interesting to hear. And it seems like there was a progression over time. And I resonate with the mantra idea too. Like, I need to notice the thought and then provide a new thought. That
yes, re-wallpaper my minds. Someone used that metaphor one time, and I was like, oh, I like that. I like it.
That's great. Daniel, you are up for your second choice.
Well, I think this one might be a little esoteric, just because it's not in Western media at all. There's a short Japanese animated film named Hotarubi no Morei, which translates to In the Forest of Firefly Light. And I know one thing that was really hard for me when I was deconverting, when I was looking at what I was losing the idea that, hey, like, what about the afterlife? Like, we all want to go on forever. I think is the kind of natural biological inclination, and we have a survival drive. It does not like to be thwarted. And I think even when I was talking through like becoming agnostic and becoming a humanist with somebody, they said, but don't you want to go to heaven when you die? And I was like, well, but like, I don't think there is a heaven. Like, it's not like I like, do you want to go to Disneyland someday and save up for it? It's like, I don't think it's real. And I was really distressed by it. And I think that one of the messages that we get, especially in evangelical Christianity, is that your life is precious because it's just going to go on forever and ever, and it's going to be this never-ending thing, and it's going to be amazing forever, and that was a really hard thing to let go of. And early in after I had deconverted, I watched this short film, which is about a girl who, when I think she's 6 years old, she goes into this forest. And in Japanese mythology, there's these spirits called yokai that live deep in the woods and the mountains and things like that. And they're sometimes tricky, and they're sometimes mean, and they're sometimes pleasant. You don't really know what you're going to get. And when she's there, she meets a young man, and the young man is a human, but he was abandoned there as a child and was going to die. And the yokai saved his life, but on a condition: he could grow up, and he would grow up very, very slowly. He would live many, many lifetimes of a human being, but he would never be allowed to touch another human being. And if he touches them, he disappears forever.
Hmm.
And so it's a little bit funny and sweet at the beginning, as this 6-year-old is just like, I want to play with you. I want to spend time with you. And he's like, don't touch me. Like, this is, stay away, kind of thing. And they slowly become friends. And she returns to the woods every summer because she's visiting the woods while she's staying with her grandparents. And it's about her slowly growing up and them slowly becoming closer. And as she reaches his, age, and their equal age, they realize that they're falling in love. And and he can never touch her, and she can never touch him, because if he does, then he's gone forever. And it's about navigating this kind of really bittersweet beauty of this relationship, knowing that you actually can't have something forever,
Mhm.
but it doesn't make it any less beautiful or any less meaningful or any less special. And I actually am not going to um, I'm not going to say the ending, because I do think this is something that you all should watch, and that everybody listening to this should watch. And going through that little journey, it's a 42-minute film, so it's not like a big ask, is what I'm saying. But it is a a theme of being authentic and being true and being loving, and understanding that something is not beautiful because it lasts. Something is not
Yeah.
precious because it lasts. It can be beautiful and precious just as it is. And nothing can ever take away that time
Mm.
that you had. And I think that watching that was, in a weird way, kind of healing for me, uh, as I realized that I didn't need to, I didn't need to experience like the quote unquote loss of heaven as a loss anymore, because the time that we have here, the time that I have with my children, with my wife, with my parents, with my friends, with people like yourself, this is always going to have happened. It's always going to have been a part of the universe, no matter how long it lasts. And I think that this story reminded me again of how um, of what makes us human.
Mm. Yeah.
Humans elevate things. That's what makes us special. We take normal things and we lift them up. We elevate things in ourselves and in the world above where they actually occur in nature. Like, we look at chemical reactions in our brains and we call it love. We
Mm-hmm.
look at the colors of a sunset and we name it beauty. We look at life and decide that it's so wonderful. We told a story about it lasting forever. And even though it won't last forever, no matter how long the universe is here, the time that we will always have been here.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
that's what that movie did for me, in a weird way, this animated film.
That's beautiful. And I think we're constantly fighting the Christian conception that it isn't worth it unless it's eternal, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually turns out that it kind of is the opposite, right? Like that because
yeah.
life in general, or love, or what have you, is finite and has an ending. It makes it so much the sweeter while we have it, while we are here.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay,
If
Colin.
I could, if I could make a quick, oh, it's my turn.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Quick interjection to Daniel's beautiful description of that the Forest of the Fireflies. Two themes you mentioned: the not being able to touch the person you love. There's a show called Pushing Daisies that has a similar dynamic, and it's so interesting. And it's a really cool, totally different reason, but it's really, really cool to watch these two characters in love who can never touch each other. And then there's also a movie from last year, a couple years ago, called Wolf Walkers, which is an animated movie.
Yes.
Yeah, that is also about she's told to never go into the forest, and when she does, she discovers the opposite, I guess, in
Of
terms
what
of
she's been told.
the people who
isn't-
are dangerous were well, the wolves, I guess, were not dangerous. So
Definitely,
amazing
we
movie.
watched Wolf Walkers with our kids, and just like the whole family just kind of wept. Like it was such a beautiful
Oh, wow.
family
That
weeping.
same studio that did Song of the Sea and the Book of Kells, I think.
Ooh, I haven't
So
seen those.
it's an Irish studio, and it's just fantastically beautiful films. The most unique animation style I've ever seen. I have yet to see Pushing Daisies, but I've
It's
heard
cool.
that it is another weird entry in Lee Pace's IMD page. Just he's such a diverse actor, so I've heard lots of good things.
Yeah, it's really great. Canceled before it's canceled too soon. So I am writing down movies that just themes you all are mentioning, and I just love, one of my great loves in life is movies. So in an effort to stretch your knowledge or your what you are aware of, and maybe some of you have seen it, there's a documentary called Kumare from 2011, and it is a trip. A man named Vikram, who grew up in, I think, New Jersey or Brooklyn or something, is of Indian descent, but he's American, goes to India and sort of observes the swamis and the yogis and the the gurus, and it is something off about it for him. He sees hypocrisy, he sees inconsistency, and so he goes back to America and he presents himself as a guru. And he speaks with a fake Indian accent. He's mimicking his mom, who was Indian born, and he grows his hair long and his beard, and he begins to attract followers.
Okay.
And you have a sort of a unknown narration where he's talking about the process, and he is, he's wearing the orange robe and he's got the staff, and he is saying nonsense, essentially, just nice things, and people are following him, and you start to watch these people evolve in really positive ways. They get more into yoga, they find levels of peace with broken relationships. A woman loses a significant amount of weight that she'd never been able to lose before. People start meditating, and throughout it, Vikram Kumare is beginning to freak out because his intentions were good. He was trying to poke fun at this idea of the guru, and these people believe him, and he doesn't know where to go from here.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's important to share the end, but I'm suddenly debating on whether because I feel like I've teed it up really nicely.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So there's a scene at the end of the movie that is, I think, one of the great scenes in documentary, the world documentaries, which is where he unveils himself to these people, and
Nice.
he does his best to soften it. But it is ugly. It is a rupture for these people and for himself. He's really regretting and worried about what this will do. And he says the message I want to share with you ultimately is that the only guru you need is the one that is inside of you. And that's why I did this. And in a sense, all of the changes that you made. You used me as a sort of a catalyst, but you did it. And what's really cool is some people walk out and there's sort of a title end credits where they tell you where people are. And one woman A couple have never spoken to him again. One went on to get her yoga certification. One said, "How can I help you in your next adventure, Vikram? Because you're a special person."
Hmm.
One is paying off her bills and still meditates every day. The woman who lost the weight has kept it off. 10 of the 14 people who followed him have stayed in contact with him, and I guess
Wow.
agreed with the accidental premise of this thing, which is that you have so much power and magnificence within you. We all do. And you don't need a guru. Here's how I look at it. If there are people listening who are still within a specific religion, it's important. I like to try to be respectful and say, you're doing a lot of it. That
Yes.
your beliefs
Yeah,
are, I'm
for
not
sure.
challenging your beliefs at all. I'm just saying that there is a credit and a pride that you deserve to feel. And that is something that I learned in my journey through and then out of evangelical Christianity. Was I was doing so much of that the whole time. I was waking up early to read a book to edify myself. I was forgiving people. I was going deep with people. I was, doing all of these things, and you get to go like, that's a good person. That's,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good heart.
Yeah.
So Kumare, Kumara. It's a trip, man. It's a great book.
That sounds awesome. I've just got one comment, then I want
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
move us
yeah, yeah.
forward. Is that we again apologetics is always saying how could Christianity have spread so far, and like these little examples of many religions that pop up, and even in a scenario where it was under false pretenses, as it were. Like, it just, this is the human condition. We want to follow people. We want someone to say, here, I have the answers, do what I say. And like, that's so common that it's happened throughout all of history. So I think that that's a really interesting
And just
point.
to add to that, David, some religions have a replicable, scalable quality to them.
Yeah.
There's a way that they grow, and there are other ways of thinking that just don't have that fire. And one of those I think of is the Unitarian Universalist Church. It's just not the imperative
Yeah.
to grow and to scale and to convert. It's meant to be a refuge to people who left that.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so it's just fascinating, right? Because then you have, Mormonism or Christianity or something where it's there's this imperative to go out and to grow it. So
Yeah.
it's but yeah. Okay.
So my happy place is middle grade fiction, preferably with strong female lead character, not necessarily. But so there's so many great books. Middle grade fiction is like 5 stars, highly recommend. Adults, children, it's just perfect. It's not vulgar and has all the gross things that adult stuff can have that isn't for children. And then but it's not that picture books are dumbed down, because that's not a true statement, but it's not like little kid kind of books.
Mhm.
Middle grade fiction tackles really hard stuff. So for authenticity and secular grace, Harbor Me by Jacqueline Woodson. So it starts with these 6 kids who are thrown together in this room where once a week they will meet at their school, and there are no teachers, and they just talk. And they're able to have conversations that they can't talk to anybody else about. They can't necessarily talk to their family, they can't talk to friends because people will judge them. But they're thrown together for this. I can't remember if it's an experiment or a class or how they did it, but they call it the art room, a room to talk. So they're in the art room, and once a week they hang out. And at the beginning, these kids, there's one kid whose family is like, his dad may be deported soon. One kid who's dealing with like racism at school and racial profiling just in his neighborhood. There's just so much. Oh, one little girl, that's right. Her father is incarcerated. She doesn't get to see him. So there's just all these different kids who normally would not have hung out, would not have been friends. And they build this relationship. This room becomes like a harbor for them. They become a harbor for one another. And it's one of those
That's good.
just it's a tearjerker, sweet, wonderful story, but also, like I said, it just tackles really hard things that these kids are dealing with, that it's fiction, but are very real experiences that kids are having. And the way they come alongside one another, the relationships that are built. And towards the end, the main character who's telling the story, she says, back then we still all believed. She's talking about when they were kids, when they were young, when they were kids. They're in middle school, but when they were young, she says, back then we still all believed in happy endings. None of us knew yet how many endings and beginnings one story could have. So like these kids have gone a year together. There has been, family in prison and all these crazy things happen. And I can't remember, but I know the immigration services come at one time. I can't remember if the dad is deported or not, but like, just they didn't realize they could be for one another like a savior, a friend, a champion, all these different things that they didn't need grown-ups for, and then they didn't need like supernatural help for. They were able to be it for one another. And it really is, it's a very short book. It's not very long, but it's one of the most moving middle grade fictions that I've ever read. And it's a beautiful story. And thinking about like me personally, I did not have that when I was that age, like middle school. Like, I don't know if you guys who have kids have watched Turning Red, but like in Turning Red, she's like all freaking out because she turns into the red panda, and her friends are like, but we love you. And they just like run and hug her. And I just, again, because I cry in movies, I just burst into tears when we watched that. It just like triggered all this stuff. I just burst into tears because I was like, I did not have that. People were so, Daniel, you talked about being bullied. That was me.
And judgmental.
I did not fit. Yes, and cruel. Like kids were so cruel to me. I had a horrible middle grade experience. And so just seeing the kids in Harbor Me and the way they come around each other, it's incredibly moving and just wonderful. And like the things I didn't have the parents to go to because they didn't take the bullying seriously. Kids are kids; they'll do whatever. Girls are mean girls, all that stuff. Um, but yeah, it's a fantastic book for any age, and it's on audio. Which anytime there's a great narrator, that can just make a book even better. So yeah, it's very good.
Awesome. Yeah, the secular grace for kids, like school is rough, like,
Yes.
and for them to experience, understand their need for community with one another and to protect one another. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so we are rapidly running out of time. I have a hard stop in 20 minutes. I want to do a quick speed round. So literally 1 minute, 60 seconds. I'm sorry we can't do it justice. But we're do our last picks in a speed round, and we're starting with Arlene.
All right. The Wizard of Oz.
Nice.
Like, yes. Like they're literally like, let's go see some supernatural guy. He will give us all the things we need. Just kidding. This guy's a complete fraud. Turns out we had it the whole time and we could totally do it. And like, I was like, wow, this is deconversion and secular grace.
Yeah.
They're like, we will make sure you make it to Oz, whether or not, I get a heart or whether or not I get a brain. And I was like, yes, I love it. There you go. Wizard of Oz.
I love it too.
And the
That's
book
awesome.
is fabulous.
Yeah.
Middle grade fiction.
Completely agree, Arlene. That's a great pick. I've loved the story for a long time, and I think it completely fits with the theme.
All right, Colin, you're up.
Okay, I'm going to do two really fast. Perfect deconversion stories. Oblivion, starring Tom Cruise, and Equilibrium, starring Christian Bale. And I will not spoil these. I'll say that Oblivion is a story about the sort of post-apocalypse world where Tom Cruise is told not to love what's left of the world, but he feels this connection to it. And that takes him somewhere. There's a great quote up front where he looks at his partner and he says, "The questions I ask, she doesn't. The things I wonder about, she won't." I think that's an incredible parallel for relationships where one goes a different direction. Equilibrium, really quickly, is about also a future world where people cannot feel human emotion. They've decided that all danger, war, violence comes from emotion. So they take a tablet every day that cuts off all emotion. He's like the lead enforcer of this, and then he stops taking his dose.
Yeah.
And you watch this guy have all of these firsts that I think people who have left an orthodoxy discover: listening to music, physical touch, reading literature, looking at a sunrise. And it's like he's a baby, like he's blown away by these things. It's very moving for a movie that has a lot of gunfights in it. And that really spoke to me, right? Just being allowed to expand and experience more.
Both of those are awesome. Those are fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. The sense of I'm sorry. The sense of wonder, being allowed to delight in stuff. David, you were talking about.
Yeah.
Or Daniel, David would talk about how cynicism is sort of the default these days. Being jaded means being realistic, and seeing people delight in things is just wonderful.
Yeah. Arlene, you had something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, any dystopian fiction, like, it's deconversion, like The Truman Show, The Giver Quartet, all of those are like, there's this one person who realizes something's not right, and then there it goes.
Right, The Matrix.
Yes,
for
all
sure.
of them.
Yeah, The Matrix and Equilibrium taught us that you cannot deconvert without engaging in a lot of martial arts battles.
That's right.
Right, we know now.
And I missed that personally. I never got to kick down a door and do a flip. So yeah,
a lot of us make up for that by just getting into fights on Facebook.
Oh
no!
Daniel, you're up for speed round.
Speed round. All right, I am going to start a stopwatch. This is going to be super dorky, but I can't not go there. Somebody Feed Phil. It's a travel show. It's a food show. I know, Colin, you're absolutely right. It is a good show. My wife grabbed me and said, like, we got to watch this show. And I said, I don't love reality television. I don't love food shows because all these snooty, like, excepting Anthony Bourdain, it's all these snooty people doing snooty things. And I just couldn't be bothered. And this is the opposite of that. It is the lead writer and I think the creator of Everybody Loves Raymond. So he's a comedy writer and he loves food, but he loves people. And he goes to all these places and he meets like fascinating people. He does like food trucks in Bangkok, and he does, these little stalls in Israel that have been there for like 1,000 years. And he does all kinds of things in cities all around the world, and just loves every person he meets completely authentically. Rosenthal is Jewish. I think he's a secular Jew, and he is just here for everybody's everything. Like, he's going to Buddhist temples, he's going into churches, he's going into synagogues, he's going into restaurants, most importantly. But also he goes to people's homes. Like, he meets chefs at restaurants and they invite him home for a home cooked meal, and he's just in there with their kids and their families, and just the explosion of delight that he brings with him everywhere is just that's the kind of humanity that I want to belong to. And I see everything he does as just being this just absolutely no holds barred joy in every kind of human interaction he can possibly have. And a lot of people love it. It's got, I think, 6 seasons now. I think season 7 is on the way. It's really, really delightful. Most people who are like food critics hate the show because they say things like, he doesn't criticize anybody. He just has yes, he loves people, and it's amazing.
And also, the recognition that people are people, and even dramatically different cultural experiences. We're just human beings, and like we connect with each other, and even just laughter. And, and the human touch is a connection with one another, and that binds us together regardless of of where we came from. So,
Daniel, I think of how Phil, when he takes a bite, he smiles with his entire body. Like, he's like, he's like, whoa. And what you find is these like Thai grandmas are like just feeding him food. It's just so it's so fun to. He's the ultimate, guest.
I just don't get how he's so skinny.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He looks like he weighs 100 pounds soaking wet, and he's like 6 feet tall.
Last comment
He
really
eats so
quick.
much.
The importance of breaking bread with one another, to use a Christian term. Like I think there's value in doing communal meals with one another intentionally, and that is such a meaningful thing as well. So, Mike, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was thinking of
Okay.
something. I'm a music lover, and I don't know how this ties into what we're talking about, but I thought it was a sweet movie. A few years ago, a movie called Yesterday. Got any Beatles
Yes.
fans? So
Yes,
this
that's a great
guy is
movie.
like a singer songwriter. He's kind of washed up. He can't really make it. His songs are not very good. Some kind of event happens, a blackout. He has an accident. He wakes up and there's no existence of the Beatles at all.
Hmm.
Nobody knows of them. It's like they've never existed. But he's a big fan, so he knows all their songs and stuff. He starts playing Yesterday to his friends, and they're just mesmerized by it. The words and the poetry, and he's like, "Y'all know this song, And then soon he realizes that nobody knows about the Beatles, so he starts playing their songs more, and it's like almost overnight he becomes the world's biggest music sensation, playing Beatles stuff. And
That's awesome.
anyway, kind of towards the end, I think there's a few people that know about it though. It's not just him, so they realize that the Beatles, who the Beatles were at one time. And anyway, he's feeling awful about it, and they just tell him, well, you know what, it's okay. Keep singing these songs, because it's really, it's speaking to people. And I just thought that might be a good one to bring up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And music is so deep. We've talked about that a lot too. That both manipulatively with worship, but also just inspirationally. I've been listening to a lot of more secular gospel music that like Lawrence comes to mind. They've got a song called Don't Lose Sight that just like it just inspires me every time I hear this song. So yeah, music is deep. Jimmy.
I'll go with Jaber Crow by Wendell Berry. I may have mentioned that in my episode, but it's a book about people, really, people and nature, in community, warts and all, normal people, messed up people, all kinds of things. And I've been through it twice. It's the kind of book you finish and then you just sort of stare at the wall for a while and let it settle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's on my TBR list. It's been there for a long time though. I haven't, so now I will definitely read it.
For my last one, and because we're running out of time, I'm really just going to do this as a recommendation, and I'm going to try not to spoil too much. But it is Severance on Apple Plus. It is an amazing story, incredibly well written, incredibly well executed. The premise, and I'm not giving away anything here, is that the technology to split your consciousness so that a version of yourself, independent version of yourself, goes to work every day, and the remaining part of yourself experiences the rest of life without having to go to work. This is deep philosophically about identity and consciousness and asks some incredibly deep questions. But beyond that, within the realm of work, is and I'll just say the obvious also, it is also a deep criticism of capitalism and office culture. But beyond that is there's a religious aspect, very hinting of Mormonism and the Puritan work ethic. And that is interwoven throughout the whole thing. And as you can guess, there is the work versions of themselves begin to want to discover more about the real world, and then, without giving away too much, the experience of being a fish out of water, that kind of thing. So highly recommended. I would love to do an entire episode with some or all of you on Severance. It is absolutely amazing. So.
Ooh.
With that, I just want to say thank you to this group of people. The podcast wouldn't be what it is without each and every one of you. You've done incredible work, either behind the scenes or in front of the mic. You've supported me, my mental health, and my vision for the podcast. I cannot say enough how grateful I am for all of you guys. This is 4 whole years. It's amazing that we are here.
Yay.
Yes, it's exciting. Yay.
Glad to be part of it.
Yeah.
Good job.
Love to see how it's become this bigger thing and just affected
Yes.
so many people and brought people together. And yeah, thank you, David, for
Yes.
taking that little seed of an idea and just persisting,
Yeah.
watching it grow.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, David.
Yep. Very
Happy
good.
4. Did you say 4? Yeah, 4. Happy 4
4
years.
years. Yeah.
Incredible. Amazing.
Final thoughts on the episode. It is hard for me to overstate how important the people you just listened to are to the podcast. I know I'm repeating myself so much, but Arlene has done almost everything, including the community management and co-hosting, copy editing, but she is the engine that drives the podcast. She helps with a lot of coordination in the background. The podcast would not be where it is at today without Arlene. Same goes for Mike T. The amount of editing time that Mike spends is amazing, and you guys get a weekly podcast instead of a monthly one because I couldn't do that at all. There's no way. As I said, Jimmy and Colin have been really helpful for my mental health, for supporting me, for giving me ideas, for letting me bounce ideas off of them, and actually providing a slightly critical view to tell me when I was wrong at times. And that is incredibly valuable, and I really appreciate it. And Daniel, for sure, is going to be that type of person. Daniel and I have not spent quite as much time with each other, but we already can tell that there's a deep connection there. And I want to see what more Daniel can do within this community with the podcast and as a support for me as well. So thank you so very, very much to all of you for supporting the podcast and what we are trying to do here to spread secular grace, to spread humanism, to provide a safe place to land for people in the middle of doubts, questioning, deconstruction, and deconversion. And lastly, I want to thank you, the listener. Obviously, none of this happens if you aren't there. I've tried very hard not to focus on numbers. I've said a number of times that we could double, quadruple the numbers if I were more antagonistic, more debate-oriented, and just bash Christians. That's pretty easy to do. But having a message of secular grace and caring about human beings is not terribly popular. As we talked about in the episode, being sincere is not going to go viral. I wanted to do that anyway. The mission of the podcast was to allow people to understand they can accept their own humanity and the humanity of others. And coming out of religion of various kinds, particularly very traditional, particularly very high control, that is quite a challenge. That's difficult. And it is really hard to do that alone. Hopefully you haven't felt alone as you've listened along with other people's stories. Hopefully you've heard your story as someone else told their story. And that magic, that connection is what will help us. That's what this podcast is all about. I want to put out one more time that participation in the community and the podcast is not about status. Arlene, Mike, Jimmy, Colin, Daniel, there's nothing special about them. They just were willing to do work. They were willing to participate. So if there's any area of expertise that you have, or even just something you're interested in doing, please let us know. Reach out to Arlene, reach out to me, and let us know. As I've said, social media, graphic design, even audio work, website design, marketing, there's just 1,000 different ways that you could participate in the podcast. Please reach out to us if you're interested in doing that. And thank you so much for being a listener. That means a lot. Next week, Arlene is talking to David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. That's going to be an amazing conversation. In early April, I'll be talking to Holly Laurent from the Mega Podcast. I'm really excited about that. And many, many community members in between. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.